So noise phobia is essentially fear of noise. And two of the most common such problems would be for thunder and fireworks, although gunshots is also on that list. And at least 20% of dogs develop this condition to some extent. And some estimates say it's even up to 50% in some studies. And as I mentioned, this often goes under the radar for many people. And at least initially. So when asked, they'll say, no, my dog isn't fearful of noises. But then when somebody who knows what they're looking for, looking at the dog, they'll actually see signs of discomfort.
Welcome to the Pet Care Report podcast by PetSummits. Here's your dog training host, Melissa Viera.
Hello and welcome back. Joining me today to talk about noise phobia in dogs is Dr. Karolina Westlund. Karolina's passion for animal welfare shows in her work. She teaches both pet guardians as well as professionals working with animals how to have well-behaved animals that thrive in the care of humans. Karolina is an associate professor of ethology at the University of Stockholm. She teaches animal behavior management through blog posts, webinars, courses, and masterclasses. She also writes and publishes scientific articles on enrichment, training, and behavior. So welcome, Karolina. I'm really excited to have you and to learn from you. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot today.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa. It's going to be great fun, I think.
Can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and about your work?
Well, I help animal lovers get happy animals that thrive and behave reasonably well, and sort of manage to live with us weird humans and our strange habits that we have. I don't work specifically with dogs, but about 50% of my students are dog people and 40% are horse people, and then the odd veterinarian or zookeeper or cat person or pig person or parrot person. I write these blog posts and I give live seminars and online courses about animal learning, behavior, and welfare. And I'm a theoretical person rather than a more practical, hands-on type of person. So my perspective is often quite different from the other experts out there. And most of my expertise is grounded in reading, discussing, and observing people and their animals rather than actual hands-on work myself. So I have very limited practical experience with dogs, particularly, actually. And I also wear many different hats. So I'm an ethologist. That's my scientific background is I'm an associate professor of ethology, but I'm also relatively well versed in applied behavior analysis. And I also know a lot about how emotions impact moods and behavior. And so I'm sort of wearing these different hats, and I can shift perspectives, which I find is often very useful when it comes to understanding why animals do what they do. And my mad skill, if you will, is that I can read theoretical stuff and sort of pick out what's interesting and relevant and then explain it in a way that is accessible to people.
And I think somewhere it may have been one of your blog posts or another interview, but you had mentioned that a lot of your work when it comes to concerning behaviors is based in fear. So dealing with animals that are fearful of something is very common in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most common behavioral problems that we see across all these different animal species, is that animals become frightened of situations, and they might not be frightening to us humans, but they're a different species, and so they'll react to different stimuli than we do, and they'll respond fearfully to it, and they'll learn to associate the situation where that thing happen, and so they become fearful of that situation, and it can sort of escalate and ripple through everything, and it becomes really problematic for many animals. So yeah, that has been one of my main concerns.
Now, when it comes to noise phobia in dogs, can you talk a little bit about what that actually means for the dog and then what that looks like for the person? So how do they recognize that noise phobia?
Yeah, I think one of the issues is that people often don't realize that there is something brewing, something going on. So noise phobia is essentially fear of noise. And two of the most common such problems would be for thunder and fireworks, although gunshots is also on that list. And at least 20% of dogs develop this condition to some extent. And some estimates say it's even up to 50% in some studies. And as I mentioned, this often goes under the radar for many people. And he's, at least initially. So when asked, they'll say, no, my dog isn't fearful of noises. But then when somebody who knows what they're looking for, looking at the dog, they'll actually see signs of discomfort. So it's clear to the interviewer that there is a problem, only the person hasn't quite figured it out yet. And some of the things that we might see would be, some obvious things would be like they're crouching, they're shaking, their ears might be laid back, the tail might be tucked, they might be salivating, panting, seeking attention. Sometimes they can come up to you to us for comfort in this situation. They might hide, they might urinate, they might defecate, or sort of try to hide or run away. Dilated pupils would be one of those, perhaps more. So it's a whole scale really of different behaviors that they might show, and it's also going to be highly individual, which out of all of those that I just mentioned, any individual dog might show. So we don't realize that when the dog flinches and hides when there's a loud noise, that is actually a fear reaction, and that may be a snowball that just started rolling down the hill, and it might get bigger and bigger over time. So it's very good to recognize when that's going on and to nip that fear in the bud.
Yeah, and out of that 20%, are there any factors that make a dog more likely to have this noise phobia? And what would those be?
Yeah, so some of the factors that have been examined have to do with the health and physiological state of the animal. So we know that pain is one important factor. We also know that gastrointestinal problems and cognitive dysfunction can be associated with an increased risk of. That's not to say that every single dog who is in pain or has any of these other issues will start showing noise phobia, but there is a clear correlation. So there's an increased risk. We also know that some breeds are more predisposed than others. So if I'm not mistaken, it's herding dog breeds and crossbreeds. And also, if we look at the ratio of males to females tend to be a little bit more sensitive. And we also know that there's this correlation between noise phobia and separation-related challenges, that animals who show separation-related problem behavior also tend to be noise phobic. But whether there's like a cause and effect, or just the fact that their nervous system is jacked up, and so that they're in sort of a constant state of vigilance, might explain what's going on, perhaps. Just to get back to why it becomes a problem is that when there's a sudden noise, so something happens, like bam, there's a noise. So we often get this orientation response and an alert response. So we get an increase in the autonomic nervous system goes ready for action. It's like, do I need to respond? Is this going to be dangerous? Is this going to be interesting? Could it be something that I could eat? Fun or run? So we get this physiological response to the stressor. And then if it indeed causes a fear response, then the animal also, so that would be part one of what's going on, that you get this physiological reaction. Part two would be then that the animal learns, where was I when this thing happened? What was going on in the environment? What time of day? What's mom doing? Where am I? Which room am I in? What's going on around me? And they start linking or associating that environment and that context with the noise. And so the fear from the noise tends to ripple out and spread to all the predictors in the environment, or whatever the animal thinks is a relevant predictor. So that's when it can really start to escalate and could become a problem, when the dog starts being afraid of dark clouds because he's learned that that's a reasonably reliable predictor of the thunder, or whenever your neighbors are inviting people to a barbecue, and that's a relevant predictor of fireworks a couple of hours later. So they'll learn to associate contexts with the noise, and they the fear spreads from the noise to the context.
Now, what are some strategies to help dogs that are noise phobic or fearful of noises?
Yeah, so it can be really overwhelming and sort of devastating to have this type of panic dog and a situation that can be really out of hand. But there's really a lot we can do, and we know that this is something that we can really help animals through. And there's essentially 7 different buckets, or 8, if you will, that we can look into, and each bucket has a whole set of different tweaks and solutions to them. So, but just to before I start going into these buckets, just don't do too much at once. Don't risk overwhelming the animal by trying, I'm going to sort of just empty all the buckets into this situation and do everything, because that will likely overwhelm the animal. So in bucket number 1 would be to look at the environment. Since the animal is learning about the predictors in the environment, we can see if we can remove those predictors or remove really any stimulus that tends to, because there's this concept called trigger stacking, when there's like, so you're fearful of noise, but there's also like somebody's dancing and there's movement, or there's like, other stimuli that are overwhelming. So the first thing to do is to sort of clear out the clutter in the environment so that we don't get an overdose of stimulation. So both if we can get rid of the actual sounds, so perhaps going into the basement or into a room where we don't hear much of those noises, so that rather than it being a very loud noise, it gets less loud, or rather than being flashing lights, it's muted dim lights. So just looking at how the animal perceives the world through the 5 senses and seeing, can we reduce the number of stimulation going through to the animal so that the nervous system doesn't get that jacked up. That is a way to help. So don't go outside with your dog where everything is happening around them. Rather find a quiet and calm place where you can relax. And so it should be safe and it should be accessible to the animal. So the animal should be able to choose whether to go there or not. But obviously, for many of them will. Some might be frozen in fear and unable to move by their own. So that would be the first bucket.
With that ability to choose, can you talk a little bit more about how important that is in the overall picture, like giving the animal that option to choose what level they want to participate with the training or the behavior management for noise phobia?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and I'm glad that you're lifting this. That the power of choice, or the importance of choice in this concept of empowerment, that animals feel that they are an agent in their own lives, and it's just not things happening to them, but that they are. We know that animals, when they decide to let things happen to them, that they're not as fearful of that thing happening, as opposed to when they're restrained and that thing happens without them being able to do anything about it. So choice is really, really important from that context, and also control, so that what the animal does has some type of effect in the environment. So those two are really important as a sort of general welfare boost. So in this type of context, when we have an animal that shows noise phobia, allowing the animal to have some choices and control can make all the difference, really.
Do you have any creative suggestions on how to actually do that and how to control the level of noises that the dog is hearing or the animal is hearing?
Yeah.
I know you had mentioned hiding places like basement. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that we have to distinguish between the acute situation where it's like, oh my God, there's a thunderstorm right here, right now. We have to solve it right this very moment. There's no room for training. We just have to sort of reduce the damage of the impact, and then it's going to be highly different depending on how you live. And so if you don't have a basement, you might have a bathroom that you could go into. You could start running some water in the bathroom so that noise is like doesn't sound like that, but so that there's a noise that sort of obscures the other noises coming in. or that you have some music. You might have some music that the animal is used to, and we'll get into that. That's one of the other buckets, actually, that the animal associates with calm feelings. So some type of music that you've played in other contexts that might make them feel calm. That you could use that. You could use pillows to sort of cover the areas where the flashing lights might come through, and pillows might also uh, absorb certain sound frequencies, especially if I'm not mistaken, it's the high pitched sounds are better absorbed by stuff, whether the low pitched sounds go through more. So it's more difficult to do something about that.
Which makes sense because, of course, a lot of the sounds that dogs are fearful of are low pitch, like thunder. It's a really deep sound, so that's a little bit harder to absorb, I would imagine.
Yeah, and so they are difficult to sort of just filter out, which is why we also need to do other things. It's just one of the buckets, this arranging the environment bucket. So we need to look at the others as well.
Now, on the suggestion to use music, you said use music that you would have the dog listen to in other contexts. Can you talk about why it's important to use the music not just when there's thunder or fireworks?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I see where you're heading with that. It was a leading question. Yeah. So essentially, if the animal already knows that this music makes me feel good, then the chances are that if you put that music on, you will help that the autonomic nervous system, you will help that find a more relaxed sort of gradient part. The gradient will be reduced. Whereas if you only play that music in that context and never again, the animal might learn to associate the sounds with the music, so that the music becomes a predictor of the scary sounds. And since those scary sounds lead to a fear response, that fear response can then leak over into the music. So you could unintentionally make things worse if the animal is not accustomed to it. So it's also one of the reasons why we need to be very careful, mindful when we do these things, is that we don't want that the changes and the novel things that we're trying, that the animal starts to associate that with the noise and become fearful of thinking, where's the noise? Because I know that this type of situation usually means that there's going to be noise, and they get all worked up from that.
Now, what are those other buckets that we can talk about?
Yeah. I thought you'd never ask. Okay, so another thing that we can do is to distract the animal, the distraction bucket. We can do things like give him a marrow bone. Some animals are going to go woohoo, and they're going to be completely focused on that and sort of filter out. So even though we have filtered out physically some of the incoming stimuli, they will now mentally filter out some of the others. For some animals, that's going to work great. For others, not so much. They're not going to even touch that marrow bone. For some, you might ask for a happy behavior. So if you do some training with your animal, you sort of engage him in some type of happy play, something that makes him, you might still get some high arousal, but it's more of a positive high arousal. It's like fun and games type of happy, rather than anxious and concerned type of high arousal.
So those would be like specifically trained behaviors. So not just like interacting and playing, but you might ask for tricks and skills and things as well.
Yeah, and I think that both of those would be all right. If the dog is willing to play, that might be a way to change his emotional state. So that he might not even notice that there's something going on in the environment. Then again, it could also be that if he's really highly strung, he's not willing to make that transition. So that distraction bucket will only work for some animals, not everybody. Some things that have been shown to work to reduce fear specifically is problem solving games. But again, that's not something that you can, if the animal isn't used to that type of game, it's not something that you should introduce for the first time when there's thunder or fireworks.
Would those problem-solving games be like training games or food puzzles? Food puzzles might be a little too easy for them, or maybe that would, depending on the dog, right?
No, actually, Actually, in the research, what they've done is typically they have like a blanket. here's a blanket, or and they'll put some treats in there, and they'll just fold it, and they'll put some more treats, and they'll fold it again, and put some more treats and fold it again, and then the animal has to just sort of work work it so that they can open it and access all the food. So it's, just really easy to us, really easy problem solving games, but it does engage the brain. It does sort of require the animal to figure out, I can smell there's food there. I can't see it, but it's clearly there. I need to somehow use my behavior, control the situation to get to that resource. And it's that type of problem solving game. And you can make it gradually more difficult by in the beginning you could sprinkle treats very generously, so they only have to like lift a little part of it, and then gradually make it more difficult so that for the expert you would have to actually unfold the whole blanket before you find the treat.
All right, I'm excited to hear about that next bucket. I know I keep interrupting. You have a lot of information.
No, it's a good thing. I do passion talking, so I could just go through all of this. So it's a good thing that you keep me grounded and also ask relevant questions. So thank you for that. No worries. Let's go into the third bucket, which would then be owner behavior. What are we doing? And I think one of the first things that we can consider is our own emotional state. Because if we're like, oh my God, there's a thunderstorm, and we get all worked up, I mean, guess who's going to notice? So just sort of finding a way to ground yourself, and to be, perhaps if you do meditations, perhaps do that so that you can be calm and grounded. It's interesting because some dogs will respond. If you talk to them in a pitying voice, like, they'll be concerned. They're like, oh my God, something in the environment. Yeah. Or if you say, oh, come on, come. They might, that can to some dogs also trigger some, it's like because it almost sounds like an anxiety whine, So just be mindful of your tone of voice and watch the dog essentially to see what works. Don't scold. Don't use any punishment or corrections or like, you should know better. This isn't, because for many dogs, they will actually, your calm, relaxed, helpful attitude can help them through something called co-regulation. Essentially, that if your nervous system is calm, it can become in resonance and help your dog's nervous system also calm down. So just being calm can really help the animal.
So neat. That's
also
so interesting.
Sorry.
That's so neat.
Yeah. It is really interesting, and I think we're only in the beginning of understanding just the extent to which this type of, it looks like woo-woo or it used to look like woo-woo, but now we actually know a little bit more about the mechanisms on what's going on. And and that it is a thing for sure. And also in this bucket would go counter conditioning and systematic desensitization. And if you're not familiar with those terms, it's essentially that we're trying to relearn the association for the animal so that when they hear the sound, if we do counter conditioning, the sound, which we typically, and this would not be something that you do when there's thunderstorms outside here and now. As a learning tool, you might still do it because it might still work. But certainly, if you want to really be prepared for when that thunderstorm comes, you should start, a couple of weeks or even a month ahead of time, and then you would introduce the sound really gradually. And you could use sound recordings of the whatever it is that your animal is concerned with, and you might even start with recordings that are different, so that the animal learns this thing that you hear a sound and then you get a treat, and then you hear a sound and then you get a treat, and then you hear a sound and then you get a treat. So they learn that the sound becomes a treat predictor. And so that over time they learn that, oh, when I hear that sound, where's my treat? So the emotional reaction to the sound has changed. So that's why we call it counter conditioning, is that the conditioning, the learning has changed from a negative emotional reaction to that sound to a positive emotional reaction. But it's really important that we don't, when we play that sound, that we don't do it so we trigger a fear response. So we need to introduce it really low, so we don't trigger a fear response, more of a, I hear something, but I'm completely calm and I'm not scared or anything, but there's a treat. And then gradually over time, we might increase that. And that's the systematic desensitization part of that. And so we know that counter conditioning and systematic desensitization works to help reduce fear of noise. We also know that conditioned relaxation does. So again, what I was talking about before is that if your animal enjoys massage or being petted, and so when you pet them, they go into this, the oxytocin and the endorphins and everything just go, and they just melt into your hands. That is great, because then you can use that to condition that type of emotional reaction to certain contexts. So you might have a specific, let's use this again because it's the only thing I have right here right now, like a mat or a bed that you condition. So when you're lying in the bed and I massage you, you feel good. Or when you smell the smell of lavender, you get massage and you feel good. Or when you hear certain music, you get massage and you feel good. So then the bed or the smell or the music can help induce that learned emotional state that they've, through classical conditioning, learned to associate with that stimulus. And so when the storm comes, you go into your basement or your bathroom, you play the sound, you have the smell of lavender and you have the right bed there, and the animal can then go into, I know this is a context I know, I feel safe and comfortable. And yes, there's noise out there, but I'm feeling good about it.
Super interesting stuff.
Yeah, it is. And that's also why I think it's so that there are so many things that we can do to help dogs who suffer from noise phobia.
And I think one of the questions that listeners might have, because a lot of these things work in combination with each other, but like you said, you're not doing all 7 buckets at once, because that is just overwhelm for the person trying to manage all of those things, but also for the animal. So I think that's where the professional help comes next. So how would you recommend somebody judges whether or not they need somebody to professionally help them with their dog if their dog is fearful of sounds? So how would they know that?
Well, it's I would probably if what you're doing doesn't help, or if the animal is really freaking out, those would absolutely be situations where I would consider, or where I would recommend getting professional help from a veterinarian, because there's lots that can be done to help reduce that fear, both with short-term or sort of medications or pharmaceuticals that have a short-term effect, that you take it and then within minutes you see an effect, and it lasts for a couple of hours and then you're done. Or there's more of these long-term antidepressants that the animals can take, that helps essentially normalize brain chemistry so that they are in a better place to learn to do that counter conditioning, for instance. Because if they're too aroused and too upset, their brain is in DEFCON 1 and they can't really learn. So we might need medication to help take them down a couple of notches.
Now, there's a lot more that goes into this, so I want to make sure we go over with our listeners where to find your work. I've been diving deep into your blog post, and you have so many resources. You have links within the post, so you can really get deep into the learning there. It's amazing. So can you tell us where the best place to find you right now is on the internet?
Yeah, well, I have a webpage, elise.se, and I'm sure you'll share that somewhere. And so that's where you'll find my blog. And I think specifically with regards to this, and I think we only covered 3 or 4 buckets now, so there are a couple more. that you can look into on a specific blog post that I hope you'll share. And I'm also on Facebook.
Yes, and all of these links will be alongside this video for the listeners to find, including the blog post. We are just about out of time, and I could talk about this all day, especially with you. You have so much knowledge and expertise. So, if you could give us one more key takeaway, if somebody is trying to navigate this is a lot of information. If their dog is fearful of noises and they're feeling a little overwhelmed about how to help their dog, what is one key takeaway that person could do today to get started?
I guess that one key takeaway is that there is help. There is a way to make it better. You just need to do some digging. And also, if I may add here, is that this is highly preventable. Highly preventable. So if you don't have a fearful animal, you can make sure it stays that way by actually essentially doing some of the things we discussed, the classical, the counter conditioning and stuff. But and take it seriously that if you don't have a problem, don't assume that it's going to stay that way, but be proactive and take care of it.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you for all of your knowledge today. And thank you to our listeners for being here with us. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, you can find the link to Dr. Karolina Westlund's blog along with this video, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Bye.